coming out? How long have you been waiting for it? Because, I mean, most of us read the original one, and this longer, more unabridged, more thorough one is something we've been waiting for.
I mean, was it 2013 that the first allegations around the Russians came out, right?
Yeah.
And I guess ever since then there have been questions needing to be answered. And when the first McLaren report came out, it provided, I think, without providing specifics, I think it provided 90% of what was needed to be known. So the second part of the report, and I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but I think it filled in a lot of details, but at a higher level around what was going on in Russia with doping and also what it meant for the anti-doping system more broadly. I don't think it added too much new that we didn't already know. So it wasn't the revelation that I think the first one was, because at least the first one kind of opened the box, and the second one did the inventory, if you want to put it that way. So yeah, I think it was interesting, and it helps to have the detail if it makes it more striking what's happening and the scale of what was going on and the extent to which they got away with it. But it didn't really change fundamentally what we already knew the problems were.
Yeah, I mean, I think just taking a look at social media and athletes' responses to the second McLaren report, none of them seemed that necessarily further enraged. Lolo Jones had a great tweet about how there's so many other, this is paraphrasing, but there's so many other issues with track and field right now that this isn't even, she wasn't even that excited by it, especially because, like you said, I think most people had a good idea already.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting polarization of responses to it, in the sense that the people who are involved in the sport, at the track and field, I think specifically, but mostly at the Olympic Games, have reacted to it with maybe a larger view than people who are not, and they're looking at it and saying, look at those Russians, look how much they've gotten away with. I think what Lola Jones said, and I don't know whether this is the tweet or whether she sent another one, she said that getting crazy about Russia is the same as panicking about your car having a flat tire when the engine is on fire. Is that the tweet? Yeah, something like that.
Yep.
Which I thought was a great analogy, and I think it captures the point. And the other way you could put that is, a lot of people are saying Russia is the bad apple. But the problem is that the tree might be the problem. and the bad tree is producing apples. And so that to me is the point. Let me
interrupt you real quick. When you say the bad tree, are you talking about WADA or are you talking about the IAAF? Are you comfortable clarifying what you're alluding to?
Yeah, I'm talking about the entire system. So the system that has produced and enabled Russia to get away with what it did. And that's what the McLaren report showed, is the scale of it. So when we talk system, we're talking about that IOC family, which then includes the International Athletics Federation, and WADA, which is tasked with, in theory, being this independent body that tests it. And over the course of the last few years, what emerged, and to me the biggest story around this Russian thing, is that you've got reports going back to 2013, where people knew what was happening in Russia. That information was passed on to the International Olympic Committee and to the World Anti-Doping Agency. And whether for political reasons or lack of resources, lack of will or way, who knows, but they dragged their feet and nothing was done about it. And they were warned about Sochi. They were warned about what would happen leading into the 2012 games even. And we saw no decisive action. So I think the Russian situation is it's effectively a thermometer for the health of anti-doping, and the risk of using a badly timed flu analogy is that thermometer is registering too high. It's saying that the sport's got a problem, and Russia absolutely were the symptom of that problem, but cannot be viewed as the single bad apple, when in actual fact the whole tree might be the problem.
Yeah. That's another, I saw Jesse Williams, who's head of the sports marketing for Brooks, talk about, Russia is only just one of what he referred to as many countries with issues like this. I think, alluding to what you said about just a systemic issue at this point throughout the sport.
Exactly. And so when that McLaren report came out, people were divided into camps saying, great, we've caught the Russians. And I think maybe it's the timing, but the idea of a villain out of Russia plays well with people as well. So
does it play better with Americans or play better with the world?
Well, it plays. From what I gather, I've been in the States for a couple of weeks, and all I'm seeing is evil Russia all the time, right? So I think it plays well over here, but also the world. I mean, where I'm in South Africa, it's the same thing. You have this stigma that these guys are going to try and get away with robbery, effectively, in sport. But as you just said, why just them? We know that in the last 30 years, other countries have doped athletes. I agree that the state-sponsored system in Russia is probably at an unprecedented scale. I don't see many other countries having that level of organization to dope the thousands of athletes that second part of McLaren revealed. So yeah. I think certainly the scale of it and the focus around the doping in Russia is probably unique. But that's not to say that there are not similar problems on a smaller scale, pockets of people doping, a system that just cannot catch these individuals. I read that WADA's got an investigative unit that is staffed by 5 or 6 people, and they say they are overwhelmed by the task that they're facing. Now, if there was one fairly depressing thing, is that the fact that the Russians were able to get away with it for so long using some really James Bond-like secretive KGB methods, but also some really basic stuff, literally just filling forms in wrong, and a hole in the wall through which you pass tainted urine to swap it with clean urine. Yeah. These things show you that the whole premise of anti-doping, that idea that we're going to test your blood and your urine and then we're going to catch you, it's so shaky that you can get by, or you can get past that in any number of different ways. So why would the same not exist in Kenya, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Turkey, Spain, Mexico? Those are just 6 countries that have been named as having issues that need to be investigated. But then I saw a stat the other day showing that for every dollar that WADA spends on testing, they spend about 12 or 13 cents on investigation. Now, in the light of what's come out of Russia, you tell me, is that ratio not completely the wrong way around? They should be spending $13 for every dollar that they spend on testing. They should be spending on investigation. It's the whole thing has been exposed to me as just not fit for purpose, to use a management jargon phrase.
Yeah. What do you think? As you've observed it, throughout the world of track and field, what do you think this Russian scandal has created among fans, among athletes? If you were to summarize a couple of those, I mean, I just feel like you're so tied in with it. If you think back to, again, 2013 or everything and after, what's happened?
I think disillusionment, cynicism, lack of trust in the system, and I remember 10 years ago, Russian performances were never viewed as being as credible as others. Now, whether that was a stereotypical generalization or not, I guess history has shown us was not the case. But Russia, again, it comes back to, this is a symptom of the problem. And I think people who follow the sport are looking at this and saying, we just can't trust what we see. And it's not just from Russian athletes. They managed to get away with it in a very coordinated, system-driven, massive scale. But who's to say that the same couldn't exist on a much smaller scale without the bribery and the political interference and so on? But I think ultimately what it's done is it's undermined confidence. I don't think confidence in sports, especially track and field, has ever been as low as it is in 2016. And that's because of the inaction and the inability of the authorities to act on what most people knew was going on. And that's the same thing moving forward now. You've got this revelation. It's been laid bare. Everyone knows the details. Like I said, we've now opened the box, step 1. We've now got the inventory. If that information is not used to sanction Russia and to take sporting events away from them, then it just sends the message to everyone that this whole system to ensure sporting integrity, absolutely impotent, completely ineffectual.
So you would believe in further sanctions, more aggressive sanctions against Russian athletes as a result of, especially the second McLaren report.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be to act on what we know. Would be to say that it's quite clear that they've flaunted relationships and their position for decades. And there must be some punishment for that, because if you don't punish the behavior, then you're just enabling it in effect.
Yeah.
So I think that has to happen, and then the learnings from it are more important. So that's always a big thing for me, is what do we learn out of it? And I think what we need to learn is that the whole system needs to be redesigned or steered in a direction that's more effective, because I don't think that at the moment it is.
And you're as far as that was gonna be my second question after asking you first, but just might as well go right into it. Is what is the way out? I mean, I think you talked a little bit more about increased funding for investigations through WADA.
Yeah,
this is the testing.
That to me must be the prerequisite. You know, when the whole anti-doping thing began, the idea that you could test the athlete's blood or urine, find the drug, ban the athlete, nice and clean, very simple, elegant way to do it, sounded maybe good in theory, but history has shown us, and it's not just Russia, it's cycling, it's other sports, it's other countries. That system needs to be rethought. So I would change the focus from testing to investigation. It's quite clear out of Russia that people who try and blow the whistle on what's happening are not respected enough. And if there's one positive thing that comes out of this Russian thing, maybe it's that awareness that, because again, we wouldn't know about Russia were it not for investigative journalists and people within that system, the Stepanovs, who are athletes and coaches. Subsequently, we've had people involved in anti-doping. They're the ones who've exposed what was going on. And there must be many more like that who are currently either afraid or just not incentivized to come out and talk about what they know. So the system needs to change in that direction. It's got to be more acknowledging and more accepting and rewarding of people who want to tell basically the truth.
Yeah.
And then the other thing it showed, I think, was that there's so much political dealing going on. You know, you talk about the International Olympic Committee not banning Russia ahead of the 2016 Olympics, whereas the Paralympics did take that step. Why is that? Well, that's because there are political relationships in play that change the decision-making, and I don't think that's healthy. So I don't know how you would do this, but I think what needs to happen is that the current system where sports are responsible for policing themselves, countries are responsible for policing themselves, that somehow needs to be changed, because there's just no incentive to reveal doping at the moment. In fact, most of the incentives exist to hide it. And so when a country is tasked with winning medals and policing doping, those two things are in conflict. There's a massive tension there, and clearly in the case of Russia, the lengths they went to show you which way that tension is going to pull. So you can't continue to ask countries to police themselves, sports to police themselves, and again, the World Anti-Doping Agency was set up as a supposedly independent body. So in principle, that's not a bad thing, but I do wonder whether it's not too conflicted. Even Richard Pound, who was the head of that agency for a long time, has spoken about the fact that it just doesn't have the necessary authority, clout, power. I'm not sure where the weakness exists, but to do its job, it at the moment can't do that. So I think they need to restructure that setup a little bit as well.
Yeah. Let me ask you again, and fine if you decline to comment, but Isinbayeva was recently named head of RUSADA. Obviously, especially in the pole vault community, that's been pretty criticized, despite no allegations on her. In fact, I had one person suggest, similar to other track megastars, Isinbayeva was too big to fail, type of thing.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not looking for necessarily your thoughts on whispers or anything like that, but Isinbayeva being named head of RUSADA, what's your take on that? Is it a good thing?
Even if Isinbayeva is the cleanest athlete who's ever competed in track and field, even if she'd never even taken a supplement, let alone a banned drug, the things that she said in response to doping allegations, many of which are now proved, to me would invalidate her as a voice of leadership on this issue. that goes without even going into some of the other things she said around social issues. But talking exclusively about the doping, her very clear disregard for independent oversight, given that she's coming into that post at a time when independent oversight is exactly what would be needed.
Yeah,
that's not a bringer of change. That's just doubling down on the same mindset, And you've seen that from the Russians. They're calling it a Western plot. They're saying that it's a conspiracy to taint their achievements and so on. So there's a lot of propaganda going on. And from my perspective, Isenberg is just part of that propaganda from the other side. I would find it very difficult to take seriously any promises about sporting integrity when they're coming from someone who has that disregard for the independence of what's been revealed out of Russia.
Does that in some ways extend to, say, maybe Sebastian Coe, as far as his refusal to acknowledge some of the corruption within the IAAF?
Well, we spoke at the outset of talking today about the Russian problem was a symptom of a larger issue, and honestly, I feel like Coe might be the same. Remember, this is the guy who, just before he became president of the IAAF, was confronted with these allegations coming out of a media outlet. So there was a German investigative journalist who put them to the IAAF in the first place, and I don't know if you recall, he called them a declaration of war on his sport.
Yeah, distinctly,
Yeah, so now, here we are, like, I don't know what's it, I've lost track of time a little bit. Are we 12, 18 months later? And they're now talking about this great investigation which has been done and the need to take action. And literally, he called it a declaration of war. So it's almost as though they don't say the right thing until they're absolutely backed into a corner, and then they'll say it to escape. That's the impression I get. And I'm not alone, I don't think, in saying that if this is a problem that has developed over 3 decades or potentially even more, this whole attitude towards doping, and I'm a big believer in the culture and the ethics of any organization are driven from the top down, in the sense that the top permits the bottom. If that's the case, and this has been 3 decades in the making, then how is it going to change when the same people are in charge who came up through those 3 decades? It's very difficult to change. And Einstein said you can't solve today's problems with the same thinking that created them. How do you solve today's problems with the same people? I mean, we got the same people. So,
yeah, well, someone else, the person I chatted with, Sergei Bubka, being the vice president, came up within that system. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
so again, that's not to say Coe was a doper. Who knows? There are rumors and allegations about any athlete who's ever won medals, right? So it's not to say that, but what it is to say is that when you look at, and again, it comes back. Russia paid the bribes, and so they are guilty of bribery. But someone else received them, right? I mean, it's not a one-way transaction. Well, I guess the money's going one way, but it takes 2 people in order for that transaction to exist. And those people were in the International Athletics Federation, and they haven't had the scrutiny on them that I think Russia has had. So, again, there's just no confidence in the people or the systems that have brought us to this point to also now get us out. And that's where, Pound, when he made the first announcement, he said he fully believes that Coe is the right person to lead. Maybe that's because there was no viable alternative, but it's just the whole thing is very shaky at the moment. That's not to say there are not good people within these organizations who are genuinely motivated to do the job, but I have severe reservations about the leadership and their desire and the will. I always say, like, where there's a will, there's a way. In doping, finding the way is difficult, but at the moment we don't even have the will.
Yeah. I guess my final question for you is just like, what were some of the noteworthy things that you saw in this expanded McLaren report, the second one? when you look through it. Again, it sounds like, there was no necessarily large surprises, but maybe just the scope, the number of the athletes that were affected, that was a highlight for you. Anything else?
Yeah, I think you've answered the main one was the scale of it, the scope, and obviously the level of organization. If you're talking 1,000 plus athletes, and for every athlete who knows what's happening, there are 1 or 2 support people. That's a lot of people to keep a secret. There's that cliche: if 3 people or 2 people can keep a secret if one of them's dead or something. I'm sorry if I've messed it up, but having 3,000 people and getting away with it for as long as they did, until one journalist and a few brave whistleblowers, that's quite eye-opening. And then the other thing that I was struck by was how fairly basic some of the stuff was that was going on. And some of the mistakes they made. A woman's urine sample had male DNA in it. And what they did was they were swapping out urine so that dirty, doped samples would be tested as clean because they were provided when the athlete wasn't doping. But in some instances, they put too much salt in those samples. They had male DNA in a female sample. So they were obviously, and I suppose it's normal, you're doping thousands of athletes, things are going to happen. But it's interesting.
I don't know why that's funny, but it's true, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
doping thousands of athletes, something's going to happen.
Yeah, you're gonna make a mistake in 1 in 100, and you're gonna have 10 like obvious clangers. But the really interesting thing is that despite those errors and so on, no one knew it was going on, short of these investigative reports and whistleblowers. So the athletes were getting away with doping in quite rudimentary, simple terms, and that's quite eye-opening and depressing in a way, because you can imagine what more sophistication would do. If you couldn't catch this at this scale with so many people who were in on it and who knew, then how are you going to catch a small elite team of 1 coach, 1 medical doctor, and 5 or 6 athletes who are doping at a level of sophistication, if not scale, that's even higher? So that's a sobering thought, actually, is that Russia fell because they were so big that eventually they couldn't contain that secret. But a small, highly motivated, highly incentivized group could dope more sophisticated with more with more advancement in technology, and they'd never be caught. Yeah.
Ross, that's all the time I want to take from you. Thank you so much. You've been very gracious with that time.
No, not at all. I hope that you feel better, and sorry to force your hand into doing it earlier.
No. Again, I get to allow you to take the time, and again, it's earlier is probably the better. So
yeah, sure.
Thanks again. Enjoy your trip. How much more time do you have in the States?
I'm in Florida now till Friday, then Dallas for a conference at the weekend, and then back home on Monday. So less than a week.
Have a great trip.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheers, Ross.
Stay in touch. Ciao.
Bye.